Chapter 16. Sunset slanting down into Axehead Canyon for a few fleeting moments before fading into dusk painted a rosy colors the drifting dust cloud which marked the departure of Windy Conklin's plumb bob crew in charge of the Seven Hook herd. Despite his knowledge of what it meant to the others, Press Moon was jubilant, and Esther inevitably shared his pleasure in his restored fortunes. There still remained the problem of stock in their range with cattle, but this seemed a far minor affair in comparison to the threatening loss of the ranch, now happily averted. May Schoonover's sons would remain for the present to ensure Moon's uncontested possession, but following Conklin's blusterous retirement, they speedily removed themselves from view. "Dang them cagey birds," Sheriff Elmy grumbled. "They know I wanted to talk to 'em about all this stock-moving shenanigans." "Well, ask me, Sheriff," Sam Sloane invited, with engaging readiness. "I can tell you anything you want to know." Ferd glowered at him. Both small men, they made an interesting contrast as they stood there, the lawman baffled and disgusted, with Sloane smiling sweetly. Elmy knew the kind of answers he'd get from this artful old reprobate. "You're too willing, Sloane." The sheriff turned towards his horse and paused with one foot in the stirrups. "I'm handing a warning to you, and Stevens too. It'll go hard with you if I find out that you've been covering for Ezra or Clay Marble. And there ain't much doubt that you are." Sam was shocked. "Oh, how you talk, Almy! Why, we wouldn't have no truck with them jailbirds." Ferd didn't wait for the conclusion, but swung astride and jogged wrathfully off down the trail. Half an hour later, they were having supper in Moon's kitchen, with Esther prettily bedecked in a gingham apron as she moved about, when a step sounded at the door. None were surprised when Clay Marble stepped in, his face furrowed with deep lines of worry in the yellow lamplight. "Well, Conklin and his highbinders are gone," he announced. "I trailed them all the way out of the cache, and just before dark I saw the sheriff on his way back to town. You reckon he's playing some kind of trick?" "I don't think so, Clay," Pat replied. "Almy's practically certain that you're somewhere in the cache, but he knows it's got more pockets than a carpenter's trousers. He's got you figured to give him the slip, and he'll make his play later on." After the first words, Clay appeared scarcely to be listening. Standing there with eyes clouded, he found it impossible to crowd back his gloomy thoughts. "Well, looks like you're in the clear, Moon," he told Press. "You got your ranch back, but just how much good this whole operation does for me I can't figure out." "Can't see it, huh?" Pat laid out his knife and fork. "Well, then I'll tell you, Clay. Here we got Plum Bob's receipt for those hot steers." He held out a paper, which he fished from his shirt pocket. "I thought for a minute we'd have trouble getting that, but Conklin gave it across like a lamb. All you got now to do is to drop in on Ed Gurley with your proof that the stock was rustled down on the Pecos, and insist that he give it up. He won't argue with you. He can't." Clay looked at him soberly. "So it's better this way, huh?" "I'd say so." Pat's tone was confident. "The way it works out now, Plum Bob can take the whole loss. They can stand it better than Moon can. I'm counting on that." "Well, that is so." Clay nodded moodily. "But where does that leave me? I can't face the law now. The minute I appear in town, Elmy is going to be grabbing me, and hard." His glance was not cheerful. "Windy Conklin knew he was safe in turning over a receipt for those steers, as long as his murder charge against me stands." Pat nodded thoughtfully in turn. "Well, I'm not done with Conklin yet. Not by a long shot," he remarked. "If he's got any brains at all, he must know that much." "And then there's Dad to be considered," Clay thrust in doggedly. You'll have to brace Gurley yourself, Pat, and tell him those steers are the price that Bonnie demands for turning Doc loose. He'll make the deal quick enough if you remind him I have a claim on the stock anyway. I'll take my chances later of grabbing the kid with the goods." To his surprise, Pat shook his head in a firm rejection of this proposal. "You're making a big mistake, boy, if you think Gurley is anywhere near as anxious as you are to get Doc Marble away from the kid. I'm not at all sure it isn't just the other way around," he added. Clay's eyes widened. "Well, how do you make that out?" he asked in amazement. "Simple. The minute Doc Marble is his own man again, then and there's the end of Gurley's absolute rule on the plumb bob. And he won't let that happen if he can help it." That was the answer. The statement only served to augment Clay's astonishment. Even Esther and her father seemed taken back. "Are you aware of what you're saying, Pat?" Esther exclaimed. "I am," Pat affirmed in a measured tone. "I know how it sounds, but something's dead wrong there on the plumb bob." He glanced around at their attentive faces shrewdly. "Try taking it for granted that May Schoonover's got the right slant, that Gurley is the mainspring of all this crooked work, and see how nicely the rest of the whole deal fits into place." "But that puts Dad in an awful position," Clay broke out hoarsely. "He don't stand a ghost of a chance amongst them wolves." "Not so fast," Pat checked him. "I figured on that, too. Ezra went with a message to Sheriff Grant over in Lincoln. Grant's been tracing Bill Bonney for months, and he'll show up here in a hurry. He rode with the kid," Pat reminded them. "When they were punching cows, he knows Bonney and knows his tricks. If he don't make things hot for Bill in a short order, I think I might have missed my guess." The others had observed Pat's conference with Ezra in Schoonover's Canyon, and later had noted the lanky redhead's hasty departure alone. They understood the weapon Pat was calling into use, for the feud between Sheriff Grant and Billy the Kid was one of long standing. Talking it over, each had his say, and if Clay was unusually silent on the subject, Esther appeared to be the only one to notice it. "You seem to be keeping your own counsel, Clay," she taxed him as soon as they were alone later in the evening. "Do you doubt the wisdom of Pat's plan?" He shook his head, uncertain of just what answer to make. "It might just prove a clever move," he acknowledged slowly. "I know Grant would risk his neck twice over to nab the kid. It's just, well, I don't trust the law in any form right now, Esther." "But what could you do? By yourself, I mean," she returned anxiously. "If Bonnie remains in hiding." "Well, I ain't satisfied that I can't find him," Clay told her stubbornly. "If I could do anything at all to help Dad, it'd be criminal not to try it." "You mean you'd make the attempt alone?" Her whisper was tense. He nodded resolutely, his intentions solidifying as he thought about it. "Pat would say no if he knew, but I gotta try, of course." "Well, I'll go with you." Esther was swift. "We'll slip away quietly. I can get up the horses without creating a disturbance, and I know these hills. Don't say no, Clay," she added quickly, seeing the doubt gathering in his face. "Father and I owe you a lot. You'll need me, and I'll prove it to you." Her arguments were sufficient persuasion, so that his hesitation was brief at best. He really did not require overmuch urging to welcome her company at any time, and having perfected their plans, they joined the others before undue conferences between them should be noticed, and each retired for the night without a further glance for the other. An hour before dawn the following morning, Clay sneaked out of the house with the utmost care, carrying his boots. There was a nip in the morning air. He donned his boots hastily and made for the corrals, when a subdued scuffle and snorting of aroused horses advised him the girl was already busy. "Draw up the cinches, Clay," she murmured, leading out the mount she had selected for them. "We must not lose any time getting away." A bare moment later they were on their way. They were a mile from the ranch before the first dilated dawn light began to shadow forth through the motionless pines. A few birds stirred tentatively, uttering faint chirps. The ponies snuffed eagerly, reaching out for a springy stride. As near as they could determine, they had succeeded in slipping away without detection, and not until they worked out of to Axe-Head Canyon, however, with the rolling sage range spread out on each hand, was Clay entirely satisfied that they weren't being followed. "Where will you go, Clay?" asked Esther. Setting a direct course across the hills, Marble shrugged. "Well, we last saw Bonnie in Rock House Valley. We'll just start looking over there first." Long before they were anywhere near the place, he laid down a circuitous route, planning to approach from another direction altogether, and clinging with great care to every winding wash or bit of cover that was afforded. "They were watching our every move before," he told the girl. "This time we'll try and sneak close before they have a chance to slip away. After that, I don't care who sees us." The sun was 2 hours high, rendering the barren rocks hot and dry by the time they reached the cluttered floor of the valley. The jumble of ledges and boulders here created a confusion which made it far from easy to locate the cave the outlaw gang had used. At last, Clay looked across the scattered rocks and found himself gazing into the dark mouth of the cavern. He pushed out into the open boldly, and Esther following close behind. "Seems there's no one here," she murmured. Clay rode up to the cave mouth and dismounted, a curtness in his movements which revealed his tight readiness for action of any sort. "Bonnie," he called out in a strong voice, "are you here?" There was no answer. The dismal silence and loneliness of this secluded spot endured unbroken. Clay essayed a step or two into the cave, peering about, but it was already thoroughly apparent that the kid had not returned to his hideout. "I was afraid of this," Esther exclaimed in distress. "Sheriff Elmy combed the valley already, Clay. He found nothing. How are we going to succeed where he failed?" "Well, Bonnie's not here right now, that's a fact," Marble admitted tonelessly, making a valiant attempt to conceal how much it meant to him. "But I have a hunch that he's going to be back all the same." He glanced over the riven ranks of granite that hemmed the valley in. "Might be a good idea to climb up there a ways and keep our watch for a while." Esther obediently turned her horse towards a gap in the first ledge, and they started to climb. It was hot and risky work. The appearance of this crumbly slope was deceptive. At a glance from above or below, it didn't appear bad, but in the climbing it proved far steeper and rougher than they had expected. Soon the horses were trembling and dripping sweat with exertion, and Clay was a little better off. He glanced about himself in puzzlement. There was little enough to be seen beyond rocks and ledges and spires and monuments hemming them all in on all sides. "We better wait here a few minutes with the horses," he grunted, "while I go on afoot and find a way out of this mess." "Be careful, Clay. We mustn't get trapped somewhere, unable to turn back." Smiling at her forlornly, he handed over his reins and turned to confront his problem. Within a few minutes he had disappeared from Esther's sight, though the sound of his scraping boots and the occasional rattle of loose stones came back. Clay squirmed up through a narrow crevice, crawling out at the top, and was about to take his bearings afresh when a harsh voice arrested him, coming from directly behind. "Sure do earn things the hard way, don't you?" were the admiring words. "You found us, now what?" Whirling, Clay felt a shock run over his nerves as he found himself staring into the face of Rude, one of the Seven River crowd that ran with Billy the Kid, his hand resting on his gun, and his stony eyes were watchful. "This is a surprise," Clay told him grimly. "But I do want to see Bonnie again. Where is he?" Rude jerked his chin over his shoulder. Right this way, friend, he said with cool sarcasm. Hang on. Clay hesitated to mention Esther, but he felt sure that they had been watched for some time as they climbed up through the rocks. I gotta crawl back down there and... Oh, never mind the girl. Rude cut him off. We'll bring her in the horses in an easier way. I'll just relieve you of this, though. He quickly snaked Clay's 6-gun from the scabbard, thrust it under his own belt. Right around these rocks here, Marble, if you please. Clay found himself in a spacious ledge overlooking the barren valley. A wall of rock rose at the back, a widening crevice giving entrance to a granite chamber into which the sun slanted dimly. Bull Toller appeared there, freezing at the sight of the man who had convicted him of cattle theft. If looks could have killed, Marble would have been a dead man on the spot, but Rude only grinned at them both wolfishly. Show 'em into the parlor, Bull, he growled. Clay crouched to squeeze through the opening and straightened at last to glance across an irregular space, roughly a half a dozen yards across. The remains of a fire smoked in the center, and over it stood Bill Bonney, alert and cocky as ever. Something about his procrast reality instantly took all the romance out of the imminent death. Doc Marble lay sprawled in a corner, his unkempt clothes and haggard eyes showing the marks of his long captivity. So low in spirits was he that his glance barely lit up at the sight of his son. Clay heard Rude speaking to someone outside. The words escaped him as he met the kid's narrow scrutiny. Well, Marble, where's the steers? Bonnie was crisp. Not too far away, Clay assured him. They were turned over to the plum blob last night by Press Moon. I've Windy Conklin's receipt of them right here, so there's no mistake. He showed the folded paper briefly. Release Doc, and he'll see that you have your stock in a matter of hours. Ain't that right, Dad? Old Doc sat up and nodded listlessly. Most of the salty arrogance had gone out of him during the past week, and he did not even glance at Bonnie. The kid stood scowling. Well, then the cattle ain't here? That's once you let me down. And who's this Conklin you mentioned? He snapped suddenly. Windy? Well, that's the new plumb bob ramrod he took. Clay broke off abruptly, but it was already too late to withdraw what he was about to have said. He took Block's place. He plunged on boldly. He did he? Bonnie's glance was icy. There was a pause, while feet scuffled on naked rock, and Esther was thrust into the sheer-walled chamber, her face etched with worry. Bull Toller was behind her. He edged into the place with a fugitive look about him. The kid ignored their arrival, his scrutiny pinned unwaveringly upon Clay. Tell me, Marble, he ground out. Just what have you done about Block's killing? Clay stiffened. It had just crossed his harassed mind that must come now. How could he tell Bill Bonney that he himself had been arrested for Block's mysterious murder, only to escape from jail by a fortunate chance? What would the cold-blooded outlaw make of such a story? Sweat started out of the stock detective's pores. Somehow he managed to keep a grip upon himself. Something which Pat Stevens had told him a day ago flashed across his thoughts. You're putting me on a bit of a spot here, Bonnie, he began reluctantly. In what way? The kid demanded, sharp and quick. Meeting his eyes squarely, Clay gave it to him straight from the shoulder. How'd you take it if I'm forced to tell you that one of your own men was responsible for murdering Bill Block? He rasped flatly and distinctively. Much as he expected repercussions from this bold counterattack, he was totally unprepared for the general explosion which instantly followed. Swift words boiled violently out of Bull Toller, and Esther's scream echoed weirdly through the cavern as Billy the Kid's hand streaked like lightning for his gun. End of chapter 16.